Hey, Joyful Journeyer. Welcome to the Joyful Journey podcast. I'm Anita Adams, your host, and today I'm excited to share the mic with Adele Fedorak. And we're going to talk about story intelligence and how the stories we tell shape our reality. Before we dive into this conversation, let me tell you a little bit more about our guest. Adele helps professional women grow their natural storytelling abilities so they speak clearly and confidently about what's important. She knows that people find their voice through the practice of finding and telling their stories. In addition to providing one-on-one coaching, Adele creates small, curated groups she calls story pods for focused story learning. And Adele has been working with an exploring story for over 30 years. Her current practice is a unique integration of three different disciplines: narrative coaching, language development, and leadership. Adele's approach has proven to be valuable in creating the context for deep, fast, and lasting learning. Welcome, Adele. I'm so thrilled to have you here with me today.
Well, thank you for having me here, Anita. I'm looking forward to this call.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So let's start with a simple question. Please tell us, what is story intelligence?
Well, the simple question is that had me like searching for years now, but yeah. Um, in general, it's about developing a heightened sensitivity and strategic use of the power of story beyond just storytelling. It's about cultivating an intelligence or competency around the role of story in human interaction and decision making. So I kind of think like it's the people who speak story is how I find people who are likely to get the concept. It's the ability to recognize, understand, and use stories to understand self and others, solve problems, evoke responses, and drive meaningful change. It involves detecting implicit and explicit narratives around oneself, others, and cultural contexts. Story intelligence includes the capacity to work with stories from the past, present, and future, applying them across various contexts and for a variety of different reasons. But by leveraging diverse story-based approaches like listening, finding, eliciting, rewriting, co-creating, to name a few, there are a lot of ways to look at story. Um, it enables productive engagement with the pervasive power of stories.
Okay.
There's a lot.
Yeah, it is, and I'm trying to digest all of that. I feel that I think you used the phrase heightened awareness. Is that right? Did I get that? There's a
Yes,
heightened
yes.
awareness.
Yeah.
That's a heightened awareness of the language that we're using as we're talking, or a heightened awareness of emotion, a heightened awareness of the story we're telling. Is it just a general heightened awareness of all of that?
It is. It is. And just like any other intelligence, and this hasn't been researched to be an intelligence, um, it's just a helpful frame of reference. But if you can think about it, when you someone's ability to hear the story in the head that they're telling themselves, and sometimes the focus is on that is the only thing that there's room for, the kind of cognitive capacity for it. But then you can at times or as you move and with it, you can understand that you have a story running in your head and the other person has a story running in their head. And you may not even be talking. Like you may be watching a movie, but each of your stories in your head are a little bit different, even though you have this shared view of the screen. So if you're having a dynamic conversation with somebody, you're recognizing you have a story, they have a story in their head. You may be telling a story. And so when telling it, you're aware of your linguistic choices, like your words. You're aware of the larger context in which you're telling the story. You're aware of your shared background that's the same and is different. So when you see a really highly intelligent, story intelligent person in action, um, and I've seen a few, it's amazing at the variety of different story elements they can hold at the same time while having a conversation.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? When you're witnessing somebody they have story intelligence, what are you noticing in that individual?
Yeah. Well, and just first to clarify, we all have it. It's just like they may overtly say, "Oh, that's the story I'm telling myself." They would potentially be talking about different perspectives in a conversation because they know that different people would have a different perspective. It helps hold perspective. Um, it helps hold complexity. Like they can be in conversation and you can see that they can hold an idea as neither right or wrong. So they can I could
I'm
easily
tracking. I'm
take,
tracking. Yeah.
yeah, you
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
take a political context
Yeah.
and like, okay, like I find I'm doing this a lot now in a political context of hearing someone and think and going, okay, this could be true, it could also not be true. And I can hold both of those at the same time so that I can speak to it in a way that is helpful. Because the person who's saying it, I can acknowledge that that's their truth, that's their view, that's the way they see it, and that is true. But I can also hold a different perspective on it. We need more of that.
Absolutely, I get that. It's discernment in a way too, right? Like
Yes,
when we're
yes.
listening to and it's so important today in this political climate that we live in, and not knowing for sure what is truth that is being put out into the world, that we have to almost detach ourselves emotionally from what is being expressed and then come back and look at what are the stories, and the possibilities. And there could be one thing that's being shared with multiple possibilities and multiple stories. And we can internalize all of that differently. You can internalize a story that's spoken one way completely different than I could, correct? Am I
Oh, absolutely correct. Absolutely. Like cognitive bias that we all bring into our world, our lives, this propensity or we will hear and find things that match our own view of the world. And we won't hear or look for things that are in contrast to it. Like we all come to stuff with cognitive bias. I have a bias for story. Like everything is story. And I hear people getting into these discussions, oh, that's a narrative, that's a story, oh, that's not a story. I'm like, oh no, it's all story, it's all narrative. It's this,
There's so many different threads that
oh,
we can follow, and I love that because well, story is so fascinating, and the lenses that we look at the world through, that's our story, right? So if we understand that we've got our lenses, that we're looking through the world with our lenses, maybe we can see other possibilities. We can take off those lenses. I'm speaking in code now, and I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but I'm thinking about some personal experiences that I've gone through recently where I've been so locked in my own story, and it was an ugly story of my sense of worthiness. Like I wasn't valuing myself. I thought I was over this. Like I thought I dealt with this gremlin years ago, and it reared its ugly head again recently. And I got so locked in my story of worthiness and my own value that I was not seeing the story or hearing the story that was happening with the other person. Actually, it happened multiple times. I feel like, and I'm gonna do a podcast on this. It was so strong for me, this whole caught up in my own story that I couldn't see and experience what was happening for the other people around me. And it's so interesting when we do that. Um,
it, and you chose a lens. Chose the lens of joy, like a joyful journey. Like that is story um, material, right? Like you have chosen to look for joyful stories in your world, in your life, and to choose the joy and see the joy, and you get more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's times where I forget that. And I choose
Yeah, yes.
and I
Yeah.
choose the story where the old gremlin where rears its ugly head and I spiral. I spiral.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to hit stay on this awareness piece because I really think that that's so crucial to um recreating stories and just understanding our lenses that we're looking at the world through and this whole discernment piece, it's so relevant. And maybe that ties into the next question. And I might just ask it. Why do you believe that story work and storytelling is the best way to get to know yourself better and maybe an extension of that, the world around us better?
Well, our stories are our identity. That that is how we see the world. That is how we operate in the world, is driven by our stories. Um, and so being aware of our stories is very, very powerful. And the most useful stories are the ones that are subconscious and are buried. And so it is the work of going and finding those stories. And the very nature of our subconscious is it's not like willing and openly sharing. So what I find is that to focus on on stories and finding and telling stories, the work isn't directly related about finding oneself. I mean, not that you can't go in there intentionally, but it's like doing story work just opens that, it's like a back door in. You share stories, and from the story sharing and reflecting with others, you start to hear what's really going on behind that. I don't know if you want to play with
Yeah,
stories a bit and find, okay, so
yeah, bring it on.
um, so what I love working with story moments. I have a linguistics undergrad, and so the smallest unit of sound is a phoneme, and the smallest unit of meaning is a morpheme. So I think of a story moment as the smallest unit of story, and it's a great place to work. Lots of people work with the big stories, and there's um, great work out there. Origin story, I forget her name, but you interviewed someone who did it a while ago who
Oh,
did a great job with.
Diane Weisnick. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there is that big story work out there, and it's very valuable.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about working with little stories now. So, Anita, I'm going to challenge you to find a moment from the last couple of days that resonates or seems interesting or perhaps has an emotion tied to it, because emotion's a great tool to
Yeah.
find. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Sure. So a micro moment, is that what we're
yeah,
looking
just a
for?
little moment. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure. I have a thing about getting outside for walks every day in nature. I think it's a very powerful way to find calm and clarity and joy and inner peace and all that. And yesterday I hit against some real resistance to get outside, even though it was a clear, beautiful day. And I just kept procrastinating doing this thing. I kept pushing it off. And it bugged me
Hmm.
that me, the woman who talks about, encourages everybody to get outside in nature, was not wanting to go. So that was a
Yeah.
moment.
Okay, great. Now, from that, because that was over um, a lot of time, take us to the 5 second piece of where you had that insight.
The insight that I was procrastinating or that I was
Yeah. Or the most meaningful part of all of that, like where
okay.
were you?
Um, so I was downstairs close to my wood stove because it was burning hot and felt really nice, and the rest of my house was really kind of chilly, and it's cold outside. It's it was this in the morning it was minus 10 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit for my American listeners. Um, but it was cold. And that's what I realized. I just didn't want to be cold. And so I had took a minute to just sort of pause and try to figure out what was the resistance. And then I felt good for doing that. There was a
Yeah,
moment there where I'm like,
yeah,
okay, like that's the awareness piece, right? Like just
yes.
why am I doing something or not doing something? And so I congratulated myself for, for that
Okay.
taking that pause.
Anita, you were getting into it already, but so you might feel like you're repeating yourself. I'll ask you, what's important about that?
What's important about that is that I took the time to actually honor my feelings and try to understand myself, why I was, this is where you're going, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How
Yeah.
can yeah, interesting. Yeah, I was trying to understand the reason behind the resistance.
Okay. And what's important about that?
It gives me a couple things. It gives me some insights to actions or inactions. It gives me some more knowledge where I can make a conscious choice on what I want to do. Um, am I missing something?
No, no, there's no right or wrong,
Okay.
right? Like there isn't. It's just, and and sometimes as it might feel like that's complete and you've dug in, but I'll ask another time anyway. And what's important about that?
For me, it was about, and it all often is, it's about conscious choice. And I just really want to live my life most consciously, intentionally. And so giving myself the time and space to just go inward and ask, what's this about? Why am I feeling this way?
Yeah.
Empowers me to make conscious choices.
Yeah.
And what you said, there's no right or wrong answer. I feel like there's no right or wrong choice there either. So I could choose to, you know what, I really don't want to go outside and be cold.
Yeah.
I'm going to just sit here with a cup of tea by the fire. That would have been a great answer, great choice. Or what I did do was I put on a nice warm jacket, a toque, and my cross-country skis, and I did a lap of the field, and it was awesome, and it felt great. And it was a very conscious choice. So,
Yeah. 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 So is that what you just did reveals so much about who you are?
mm,
And it was from a moment.
mm.
I loved the aha moment you had when answering the first question. I know viewers won't be able to, or listeners won't be able to see it, but you lit right up. You're like, oh, this is it. This is why we're going to go deeper into a story. I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. And it says it's kind of it's applying a narrative coaching principle. So shout out to David Drake, the narrative coaching. The question, what's important about that, is so powerful. And you can use that with anything. It doesn't have to be in story, but the thing is, if you practice it with story, it shows up in other parts of your life, like maybe with kids of, oh, what's important about that? Or a spouse who comes with something that kind of throws us, huh, what's important about that? It's a useful question.
Yeah, it's a fabulous question. It's pulling back the layers and just going deeper and without judgment, right? there's no, I think that's got to be an important piece.
Mhm,
No judgment,
mhm,
just curiosity.
mhm. And playing. Like,
Yeah, that's one of
it's
my favorite words, by the way.
is it?
Playing.
Oh, no doubt. Um, and then, okay, so that's the process of working with the moment to get more insight. And the process of finding daily moments is a very helpful process. It comes from the work of Matthew Dix. He's got a great book out called Story Worthy, and he calls it homework for life, where every day you just record on paper, or I guess you could do it video, audio, however, record the most story-worthy moment of the day. If you're going to have to tell a story somewhere for something, what was the most story-worthy moment that happened? And he does it from the perspective of gathering. like a story cache or um, like a repertoire of stories that you can use whenever you need a story. But when I've done it with groups and they report back, I almost feel like I kind of giving it away. But what happens with this process is people start to realize when they're in a story moment. They're like, oh, this is the one I'm going to write down. And it's the awareness of knowing you're in a moment that lets you be in choice. You can't choose unless you're aware, as you say, right? You said it. And unless you do the work of being aware, you're not going to get anywhere. So, oh, I'm in a moment. Oh, this is a moment where I'm like showing up angry or whatever it is. It's awareness tool.
That is so fun. A couple things come up for me. First off, some of my Toastmasters training, this came
Mm,
to this concept of keeping like a story journal and always carrying pen and paper with you, a little notebook, so you can record those story moments because that they stories are are what light us up and get response from people as well. So I love this concept. And I only ever considered it from, my writing perspective and the stories I want to share with the world. But you're talking about something different and how it can help us understand ourselves more and create an inquiry into self. The other thing that this hits for me is when I've used this approach in the past, where I'm like, oh, this is a story. It has actually helped to dissipate a challenging situation for me. Where like I remember now, I look back at this incident that happened when I took my kids camping. It was just me and my two children, and they were young at the time, and my husband wasn't around, and the clouds just dumped rain on us, and in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, the tent is leaking, and I'm having to get out of the tent and try to fix this thing, and I don't have a headlamp. I've got a flashlight between my teeth, and I'm cussing, and I'm so frustrated with this. And then I had the thought, it's like, this is going to be quite the story. And something miraculous happened. It
yes.
just lightened my mood. I was no longer angry. And I started to think, I started to actually look around my environment and taking in all the details so I can retell this story in the funniest way possible. And it just totally changed the
Oh,
whole
yeah.
experience for me. And
Oh,
now,
totally.
now when, anything happens that's just like, oh my God, the first thing I think about, this is going to make a great story.
Okay, that's brilliant. Because what you just demonstrated was story intelligence and
Oh,
the
yeah.
and
Okay.
the value of having it.
Yeah.
Like it's just a story.
Yeah.
Like it's just a story. Once if you can get to that point with something going on, you have way more capacity for something different to be in the space. And your focus went, oh, but I'm gonna write this, so I better know what I'm gonna be writing around about. So I'm gonna look around, see, and your focus just totally changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like even to the point where I noticed that because I've got the flashlight stuck in my mouth, I'm drooling now.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's
Oh,
just like
oh, that's great.
and then I'm chuckling as I'm going, oh my God.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's interesting. The details are helpful. And when
yeah.
we were talking about your story that you shared about yesterday and whether or not you were going out, when you brought detail in about, oh, you're downstairs by your fire, um, it was like -10 outside, like it takes the listener in that place with you. It also takes you back to the
Yeah.
moment and you can access more.
Yeah. So interesting. I love this conversation. It's so cool. Now, I think you probably have already answered this question, but there might be more to the answer. So I'm going to ask it anyways. So if someone wants to use story as a way to better understand themselves, what direction would you give them to get started? And we've got, what's important about that, looking at the story moment and
Mhm.
what's important about that. Is there another layer or something else that we can use as a tool to help us better understand ourselves through story?
Mhm. I can tell you, if someone were to do the daily story finding and then once a week dig into one of those moments with those questions, the one question repeated, um, like that is life changing. Like that alone is life changing. And then you want to ask what more could somebody do to get better with understanding their stories?
Well,
Is
you know what? Actually, what you just given is
yeah,
it's maybe that's enough. And
yeah, I've
it's so perfect and it's something I'm going to
yeah.
start doing. And I love this idea. I'm going to get a new journal. I love journals. I've got so many journals. It's kind of ridiculous how many different journals I have. But there's going to be my moment of the day story journal that I'm going to keep by my bed and I'm going to reflect on each day. What is the one story from today? And it could be the smallest
Mhm,
little incident
mhm. And put enough
detail.
detail that you'll be able to take yourself back there. Because
Yeah.
I'll go back to look at some of mine and go, what? What was that? I learned to put more detail in. It's helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And then this, pardon me, the second part of what you just shared is then once a week go back and look at
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
And then you can choose one moment to maybe dig deeper into to understand
Yes.
the emotions.
Yeah. And writing is a great way to understand yourself, better understand your stories. Um, I don't do much with writing. I do more with oral story and just telling because I find it fast and social. You can get way more story interactions in a small group than you can just being by yourself and writing, like writing them out. But also, when you do it with other people, they are like the mirror. They're just reflecting back to you what you're about and what you're sharing in a way that you can't yourself. Like you can dig it deep with the questions for sure. You can write and you can and dig deep in free journaling about your story. Um, you can find things there, but it's so much. It's like a wider, huge lens that is now available to bounce off of to understand yourself. I've had stuff pointed out to me about myself that I was like, oh, I didn't know you saw that in me in that story. Huh. And or even just the simple act of sharing it to people who are listening is itself, that act is actually enough to go, oh, um, that's like, it's just different when you're witness saying something out loud. It's a different experience.
So is that the story pod that you have
Hmm.
created that you talk about in your bio? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Um, that's really interesting. Yeah, like I write my stories. Like that's to me, I find great value in taking the time to be reflective and to think about the words and to create the scene.
Hmm.
And I need the space and time to do that, to just to be able to relive it and write it. And there's to me, it feels like it's a bit of a game, the writing process, but maybe, like it's a game for you too, in that the speaking process. I feel I just need time to figure it out first myself before I want to share it with anybody. And then
Hmm.
it's also when you share it with, hey, here's something a thought
Yeah.
that just came
Yeah.
to me. When I think about what I want to share publicly, and what I share and how I write for just my eyes and just for me, it's almost like a slightly different voice that comes out. Is that what's your assessment of that? Am I hiding, do you think, when I'm
Mm-hmm.
speaking publicly?
I do that. I mean, it'd be interesting to look at what you write and what you share publicly. But I do. It's a personal belief of mine that there's um, what we choose to share publicly does doesn't it doesn't have to be 100% for it to be true. Like we get to have privacy with some of what we do in our in this world that asks us to put our life online all the time. Like not
Mm.
life on the line, but
Right.
like our whole lives to put it in social media. It's like, no, you get to choose what you put out publicly and why you're putting it out. Like when you put out something for people that and you want it to be of value for them, you're putting it through the audience lens of like, what do they need to hear? What words do they need to hear to understand what I'm actually trying to say? Where you don't have to do that translation on your own work. You're just writing it for you.
I guess that's exactly it. That's what I do. I want it to be understood and that my what the story that I want to impart is received. So I put more thought into how I want to express something when I put something when I'm writing to share.
Yeah. And I've read your writing, and it's very generous and honest. It doesn't feel like you're trying to look a certain way. Um,
Right. Good.
I think that's, yeah, no, it's
Good.
good.
Okay, so just these two approaches, it really doesn't matter, is what I'm hearing. It's more personal. Like for me, I like to write and get my stories out on paper. You like to speak orally to and share that way. One is not necessarily better than the other. There's just different
They're
things to aim at.
different.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, they're different.
Now, if somebody,
And
pardon me,
mhm.
go ahead.
I was going to say the value of both of them is that it's the externalizing of the story. Like the story is outside yourself when you
Yeah.
get it on paper or when you say it out.
Yeah.
Um,
I do like what you said about the mirror piece though. Like you might get another layer or level of understanding of self when things are mirrored back to you. So that's really interesting. If somebody wanted to set up a story pod, would you just encourage them to find a small group of people to, do something like this with, or is it better facilitated through hired help? Like that's a
I know.
really weird question. I,
No,
I
I
don't,
know,
I,
but
I
yeah,
don't, like I see the value of
yes.
what you're doing, and not everybody is going to necessarily hire somebody to go through this process. So I guess I want to make this accessible for everybody that's listening.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's interesting because I had pulled in unpacking a few months ago, I'd pulled out something I had created called Story Club. And it was for all that. It's like the people, it's a book club, but it's for oral story instead of,
I
I know.
love
Isn't that
that
good?
idea.
The challenges is that there's what I've realized in doing the work is there's a lot that I do to set the context. Um, so there's some people who have amazing friends that they do sit around, they do share stories, and like there's really deep listening is a big part of it. Okay, so to answer your question, yes, this is if I were to pull together, like tell someone to pull together their own group, I would say um, deep listening is a requirement. And so much in our social world, I know, at least the social world I'm in, is
Mm.
that a lot of people are just waiting for the pause so they can speak. And it's like, and that is not what happens. It needs to be really deep listening. Um, the intention of the time together is around sharing stories, just little stories that that happened that have come to mind, or a story you're in. Like we're so used to the stories need in the simplest terms, a beginning, middle, and end. Or there's a story arc, and you can look at it setting, initiating event, however you want to look at story structure. And it's like most of the stories in our life we're in the middle of. They're not over. It's not I often say "Hey, it's not over till you die. Like these things that creep up, it's just a different version. So it doesn't have to be like follow any rules about the share. It could be something that you're just right in the middle of.
Is there an ideal number of people that should be part of like
Mm,
a story hive or a story?
yeah. Having two isn't quite enough, but two is a start. But I find even in one-on-one coaching, I'm often saying I need to pull together a group for you because the
Yeah,
group is just so much better and faster than
right.
one than in some of the work. So three, four, five, six is seven, eight. I like working with six myself. it just lends to dyads and triads and
Right.
um,
Yeah.
really well
Awesome.
because the goal is to get more telling. Um, there's lots of people, especially there's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, don't speak a lot. They may be introverted,
Mm.
may not be comfortable, they may there may not be a context where it's okay to be what I call messy, or some other people would call disfluent. Like when you're just getting your head around an idea for the first time, it doesn't come out clearly. It's not supposed to. Yeah,
Mm.
the expectation is that we talk clearly, and yeah, it's there's lots of expectations around how, especially as women, we show up in the stories we tell. That's a whole nother topic for
Yeah,
a
right. I
whole
know.
nother day.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, yes, getting to like, and and sometimes it's like I'd handpick. I would find my friends who are like the good listeners,
Right.
and I would even phrase it that way. We're getting together to do story listening. The emphasis on listening. Like I want to get together a panel and put them on a stage, a panel of people who are like really good listeners, and have people from the audience stand up, and the listeners demonstrate what really good listening looks like. Like I'm not talking quiet hands and like this is I'm a speech pathologist by background where I was a coach.
Okay.
So in schools it's like eyes on listener, hands and laugh, or like different ways of doing that. It's not that kind of what listening looks like. It's like, oh, they hear the things between the lines. They hear what wasn't spoken. They hear what was spoken in a way that just has a little um, change in
Emotion.
tone that makes
Yeah.
something different. But we don't highlight the listeners. It's always a speaker on
Yeah.
stage.
Yeah.
But I'd gather is that's just coming to me. I'd gather in the under the context of story listening.
And when people come to you for your story pod, um, is there a specific goal that they have in mind, like a common goal that everybody shares that brings them to be wanting to be a part of something like this?
That's a great question. It's been a struggle because from a marketing perspective, I've been told you need to find your people. And I'm like, my people are everyone
Mm.
that's that want to speak more story. Um, so currently, the people that come have a idea. Well, some of them want to just get better in their story intelligence. They want to be more fluent being in story. They lead others and they do story work with others. And so they come here to me to find different ways of working with story. Okay. So I have a small group right now. There's only 3 people in it. And one has come for that reason. She's a leader, leads leadership retreats. One is coming for her writing, and one is coming because she is often asked to speak at fundraisers, and she wants to be able to tell more stories, um, a wider range of stories related to the topic she's being asked to. So, past clients have written books. Uh, 2 people have unplanned done eulogies with the stories that had come up, and someone passes, and any reason you need a story.
Got it.
Job interviews.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, stories really do help capture an audience's attention, whether it's an audience of one or many, right? So it makes sense. It makes sense to develop this skill for multiple reasons, to be able to promote your service, yourself, to understand yourself, as we've already discussed. Yeah, there's some really great reasons. I want to shift this slightly. We've touched on this a little bit, but if I want to go into the deeper aspect of rewriting this our stories. So,
Mhm.
we talked a little bit about, the unconscious or semi-conscious stories that we tell ourselves. And many of those stories are the ones that actually really hurt us instead of serving us. So how do we become more conscious of those stories, those stories that literally shape our reality so we can tell better stories that shape a better reality?
Mhm. That's a great question. And it is. Um, it's finding them is the first step, finding what those stories actually are,
Right.
and being curious
Mm.
and letting them emerge. Like I just recently, like I've coached many people on their one of the topics that comes up is their inability to ask themselves the question, what do I really, really want?
Yeah. That's the work I do. And I'm
Yeah, yeah,
shocked
I
with
bet
how
you
many
do.
people have a hard time to answer that question.
Yeah. And I had never felt the struggle with the question. I've like in a really busy family life, for me, it was a choice often of how I showed up in a context. That how do I really, really want to show up here and be here? Um, and at times there was the choice, like our kids were in multiple um, competitive athletic endeavors. And it was a choice to allow our kids to play more than one sport in a season. And it was a lot of work on parenting it. But it was a choice. It was a known choice, but it took up a lot of room. There wasn't a lot of room to ask the question, what do I really, really want? So I had a question, a story about myself that I could ask myself that question. I had no trouble asking that question of myself because in the context I was in, the choices I had, I felt I was fluent with it. And I realized that my youngest has just got out at um, first year university, and I have a shift in my time and my responsibility and my role. And I have stepped into this learning how to ask myself the question at this stage in my life, what do I really, really want? It has changed the story I have about myself because before had the story, I didn't need it. And just the awareness of it was enough to change what I do, how I talk to myself. Um, so sometimes you don't have to do more than be aware of the story. This is the point I'm trying to make. Awareness itself can sometimes shift things. And then once there's an awareness of an old story, like I'm not worthy, which is awareness, we also need to build in that we live in a context, in a world, in a culture that gives us the message that we're not worthy. We likely potentially have come from a family where the messaging is, whether through words or through action, you're not worthy. And perhaps in the education system at some point, the messaging is you're not worthy. Like a person's inner story of I'm not worthy is not there from the person's choice. It's been a lived experience, and there's these deep ruts that are that are there and will always be there. We don't get rid of those. But what we do is we make a new set of ruts, right? So what is the story that we want to live into? If the story is that I I am worthy, each person is worthy. From there, knowing what that new story is and why that's important. And that next step is looking for evidence that that already happens. I let myself have conscious thought about what it is I really wanted to do. That is an action of seeing oneself as worthy. So it's this constantly pulling in evidence,
Mhm.
noticing that when the old story comes up, oh, that's the old story. Oh yeah, those are those ruts over there. Oops. And you're coming over to new ones.
I like that you use the word notice. I think that's key. It's being in the noticing, right, of these things that are happening, noticing our reaction to things and the emotions. I'm reading this fabulous book right now. It's called The Divine Matrix by Greg Braden. And he talks a lot about the intelligence of emotions and
Mhm.
how really tuning in and being aware of the emotions that's how we can identify our stories and change our stories is by really focusing on focus. That's another key word. Where we lay our focus, that's the reality we create, right? When we focus
Hmm.
on I am not worthy, then we see the evidence all around us that point to us not being worthy. When we focus on our worthiness, then we can see the evidence that proves our worthiness. I find it so fascinating. It's just such a the power that we have, really,
I know.
and it is so tied in with story. It's so important that we understand our stories and we witness, we stand in witness of our stories without the judgment that goes there too, right?
Hmm.
Compassion is another. I want to bring somebody on the show to really dive into the importance of compassion and
Mm.
compassion, if we have compassion for ourselves, I think we can allow for our stories to reveal themselves to us without judgment. And then we can stand back. You were talking at the beginning of the show about, I don't know if you use the word detachment, but it's kind of, stepping back, witnessing our stories without judgment. Um, you're
Yeah.
doing important work, Adele. This is so, so important for changing the tra trajectory of our
Yeah.
lives. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's very intertwined with the work that you do. We can do the same type of work. You've helped me see the the externalizing the a lot of people's preference for externalizing their story is through writing. Um, and yeah, there's this take the chance and do some sharing of mini oral stories with the right people and see what shows up.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Very, very cool. So I feel like, I was going to ask you to explain what narrative coaching is, and I feel like we're kind of demonstrating it. This is what we're talking about, really, isn't it?
Um, yeah, and a narrative coach is kind of trained and works in a way that it's all about working with somebody's story. There's no real goals. There's no trying to find the problem that is in other types of coaching. This is where the client shows up, and your job is just to help them get the story out that is relevant to what's going on right now, and deep listening before they even start talking.
Mm.
And then once the story's out, you you play with it in a whole bunch of different ways to see what you can find that's new.
Do you have a practice that prepares you for deep listening prior to meeting?
Mm, mm. Meditation. Yeah, I attribute my background as a speech language pathologist to to getting me started on the journey of deep listening, because you have to really listen carefully um, for a whole bunch of different reasons. Um, but meditation and listening with your whole body, so bringing your body in to find the resonance. There is like a detachment. Is this? Uh, you're not just taking in the story, you're watching them for the change in um, you, tone of voice or gestures, or so you're softly listening to the story, but deep listening to um, mm, the energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's we do a lot of that actually in story work is learn how to be a listener.
You've mentioned that a few times in different ways through this show, and I get it. I get the importance of that. Like I talk a lot about listening. My book is Whispers of the Soul. It's about going inward and listening to that inner wisdom. There's so many nuances to that. There's so many
Oh
different
yeah,
ways to listen.
yeah.
I am somebody I deeply respect. I write about her in my book. She transformed my life. It was a coach that I worked with before, and her name's Lisa Marie Platsky. And I work with her now. I'm part of her team and doing some work together, which is fabulous. And I love that I'm learning so much more from her now. And in this role is and differently than I was learning when I was a client of hers. And she has a summit that is coming up in 10 days or something. And I'm gonna it's gonna be in Tucson, Arizona. I'm heading down there to support her and be a part of this team. And we got on a call the other day, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm heading to the airport tomorrow to go to Arizona for the summit." I'm like, "Wait a minute, the summit's like 10, 12 days from now." And she's like, "Yeah, I need to go and just be in the listening so I can really be there for my clients when they show up." And I was like, wow, I just love
Beautiful.
it is beautiful. And so we talked a little bit about it, and she's like, "Yeah, she goes, my husband doesn't come. Uh, I don't go and see people. It's not about having lunch dates with friends in the community. It's not about, going to, check out the artwork. It's about being present, getting really grounded with the work I'm here to do, going for nature walks, because she's the one that really got me going into nature um, with intention. And it's about really tuning in. She says she also gets body work done so she can be a fine-tuned instrument and really listen to her audience, her attendees, and be of the greatest service to them. And wow, even as I say that, I just get goosebumps all over
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
It's such a powerful thing to do. And it never once occurred to me to do something to that depth. Like I meditate before I have my interviews, to get myself grounded. I meditate before I meet with my clients. I'll go for a big nature walk to really, especially if I've got a lot of stuff just buzzing around in the head, sometimes I can't get into a meditative zone until after I've gone for a
Hmm.
nature walk. But it's that coming down and really grounding yourself so you can be of the greatest service to those you are working with, those you serve. And it's in the listening.
Hmm. I love that story about Lisa Marie.
Yeah.
There's so many people in the space work so hard on what they're going to be saying.
Yes.
Right? Like, and they don't pay any attention to the listening. And so, um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a beautiful story.
It is, and I'm so inspired. I'm learning to do more of that. The 10-minute meditation before, doing a presentation is not going to cut it anymore, right? We're going to go deeper, be more prepared in advance so you can, take that time. I don't know if 10 days that that's too much for me to even comprehend right now.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know that doing more of that grounding work before a big presentation or connection with clients makes sense to me. So you can really, really, truly listen. I love that, and I love everything that you're saying. That the storytelling is a tool to help you develop the listening skills, isn't it?
Hmm. Yes. And like there's eliciting a story. Like you
I mean,
elicit story,
oh,
elicit, like get a story out of somebody.
okay.
Yeah. So you elicit story all the time in your podcast. I mean, you do it in your coaching too. You are getting stories out of people. And we need more of that.
Hmm.
We need more stories out in the world that are not being shared. Um,
Yeah,
and some of the best stories are ones we need to go out and elicit from others.
yeah,
There's love.
beautiful.
And I knew it would be a great conversation, Anita, because you speak story.
Oh, that's fun. I haven't put that. descriptor on me before, and I like it. I'll hold on
Yeah,
to
I
that
keep it.
one. Yeah, I like it. I like it. Ah, Adele, is there any final words that you want to share with our audience that you feel maybe we brushed over or something that we didn't address that will help the listener in developing their storytelling ability, or their listening ability, or changing the narrative? Those are, I guess, the three main things that we've kind of covered.
I don't feel like there's anything unsaid. I the playfulness, like the discovery, curiosity combined with there's no right or wrong in it. It's just a place to play. Um, I encourage some more of that.
Awesome. And I understand you have an offer, a gift to give to listeners if they wanted to connect with you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what it is that you are offering to the joyful journeyer?
Yeah, yeah. I would love to offer a conversation about their their life with story, like what their stories are, what um, they're noticing about themselves in terms of their story intelligence. I'd love to just talk story with people who would like to have that conversation. And so I invite to a 30-minute conversation about story.
Adele, would it be something like what you did with me, actually, just asking me to think of a story that happened in the last 24 hours, and then like you just pulled out so much from me in that
No,
short little
I know. And
moment.
I'm so glad you played.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We can go there
Yeah.
and do that. And someone may have something else that they're really super curious about and want to talk about,
Yeah.
which is fine too.
Awesome.
Um, but yeah, playing with story in that way, absolutely.
Beautiful. Okay, well, we'll make sure we include a link to how they can connect with you. Would we be driving them to your website, or is it do you want them to reach out to you by email, or what is or do we need to
Yeah,
figure that out and we can add that later?
we can add it later, but I do
Okay.
have I did get the URL, connectwithadele.ca.
Oh, awesome.
So you don't have to remember my last name. I
Right.
almost wanted to call it the other Adele. Um, but so that's always a placement. My website is adelefedorak.ca.
Okay.
Um, definitely.
Good.
Yeah,
Well,
those are
we'll
places to reach out. There'll be a link.
perfect. We'll include that. Thank you so much for showing up and playing full out with me here on the Joyful Journey podcast. So enjoyed this conversation. You're a delight to talk to. And yeah, well, I think we might have to have you back another time. And there's so many possible
No.
avenues we can go and talk about all this stuff. So thank you again.
Yes.
And
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you,
uh,
Anita.
awesome. Yeah, awesome. Joyful Journeyer, I hope you enjoyed our show today. If you did, and you know somebody that needs to hear it, share this with them. Remember to like and subscribe to our channel, and we will catch you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.